Your hands slowed down before you knew why. Not dramatically, just a fraction of a second where the motion stopped being automatic and became something else, something that needed to be felt before it could be continued. The backs of your hands, the quality of the air against your wrists, a weight behind the eyes that arrived without a source, without a trigger, without anything in the room to explain it. And you stayed there, not long, maybe 3 seconds, in the small, unannounced gap between one ordinary moment and whatever this is. That is not anxiety. That is not fatigue. That is the body receiving something the mind hasn't finished processing yet, a signal arriving through a channel that doesn't use language. And the reason you're here, right now, watching this, instead of doing the 1,000 other things available to you, is not coincidence. Something in you recognized the signal before you could name it. Something old, something that has been waiting for this exact window to become legible. Before we go deeper, like this video, subscribe, and write in the comments, "I am ready to receive." Say it out loud as you type it. That is your nervous system signing in. Everything that follows lands differently when you are fully here. Because what is happening today is not a soft spiritual invitation. It is a precise astronomical event, one that only forms a handful of times across an entire human life. And it does not arrive gently. It arrives in the body first, in the hands, in the quality of breath, in the specific weight behind the eyes that you already felt before you pressed play. That feeling is not random. That feeling is information, and what it's pointing to is something that was buried, not lost, buried, and is now, today, on July 27th, surfacing without asking your permission. Stay with this. What opens next is the part most people miss entirely. There is a specific kind of person this transmission reaches. Not someone who simply feels things deeply. Many people feel deeply and still look away when the feeling requires something of them. This reaches the person who felt something real, something that didn't fit the usual categories, didn't respond to the usual remedies, didn't politely recede when they tried to redirect their attention, and chose at a specific internal moment to remain in contact with it rather than file it away as something they would never fully understand. You were standing at a fork. There was an easier path available, the one where you name what you feel as something smaller than it is. Call it infatuation or nostalgia or the brain doing what brains do, and return to your ordinary life with your ordinary explanations intact. That path had a lot to recommend it. It was socially acceptable. It was emotionally efficient. It required nothing irreversible. And you chose the other one. Not loudly, not with a declaration or a ritual or a conscious decision you can point to. You simply did not take the easy path. You stayed in contact with something unresolved and let it ask something of you. That quiet internal choice, the one nobody witnessed, the one no one confirmed was correct, is the credential that opens what opens today. This is not for the person who held on because they were afraid to let go. This is for the person who held on because something in them recognized that what they were holding was real, and real things are not discarded simply because they are inconvenient to carry. Now let's talk about what is actually happening in the sky, and why today is not an ordinary day, even if it looks like one from the outside. The sun is currently at 4 degrees of Leo. The sun, in any chart and in any moment, is the force that illuminates. It does not create what it shines on. It reveals what was already there. In Leo, this force of illumination burns with particular intensity and particular pride. Leo is the sign of the heart's full expression, not the polite, edited, socially calibrated expression, but the unguarded one, the one that knows its own value and does not apologize for taking up space. The sun in Leo is not asking whether it's appropriate to shine. It is shining, and that's the end of the conversation. Directly across the sky at 4 degrees of Aquarius sits Pluto in retrograde, which is crucial. Pluto is not a planet that announces itself. It operates below the surface of visible life, in the layer beneath the layer you can see, the place where the real agreements are kept, where the real fears live, where the connections that cannot be explained by ordinary logic continue to exist long after the logic says they should have dissolved. Pluto governs what is buried, not destroyed, buried. There is a precise and important difference. What is destroyed ceases to exist. What is buried continues to exist underground, continues to move, continues to press against the surface from below. Pluto is the force that makes that pressure impossible to ignore. In retrograde, it is not moving outward. It is moving inward, back toward what was already buried, exhuming it with a precision that feels almost intentional. Because it is intentional. Retrograde Pluto does not accidentally surface things. It surfaces the specific things that the soul agreed to address before this lifetime began. When the Sun opposes Pluto, and they are doing so today at an orb of 0.2 degrees, which means they are essentially exact, which means the force of this alignment is at its maximum possible intensity, what happens is a confrontation between the visible and the buried. The Sun's full illuminating force directed like a searchlight into exactly the place Pluto has been tending underground. Every buried bond, every connection that continued to exist below the surface of your conscious life, every agreement the soul made before the mind had words for it. Today, that light reaches it. Today, the pressure from below meets the illumination from above. And what that produces is not a thought, it's not an emotion, not initially. It's a physical event. In the hands, behind the eyes, in the quality of breath, in the slowing of motion that happened before you knew why. And Jupiter is also conjunct the Sun today, only 1.5 degrees away, which means this illumination is not merely personal. Jupiter expands everything it touches. What the Sun reveals, Jupiter amplifies. This is not a quiet private reckoning. This is a past life bond surfacing with the full amplification of the largest planet in the solar system behind it. What comes up today comes up with weight, with undeniable clarity, with the specific quality of something that cannot be unfelt once it has been felt. This is not a mood. This is not projection. This is a buried past life bond surfacing through the only channel strong enough to carry it, your body. At the precise moment the sky created the conditions for it to become conscious. This portal does not open for everyone who feels something unresolved. That is important to understand clearly. Feeling the unresolved thing is not the credential. What this activation requires is more specific than that, and more demanding. It opens for the person who kept holding something real through the specific accumulation of ordinary days when holding it made no visible sense. The days when moving on was the reasonable, recommended, widely validated option. The days when someone who loved them gently suggested that letting go might be the healthier path. Those suggestions came with good intentions. They came with logic. And you could feel the logic, you understood the logic, and you still could not make yourself abandon what you knew was real simply because the logic said it was time to. That was not love failing. That was love being honest about what it could and could not release. There were other moments too, moments when the feeling arrived not with warmth, but with grief. Not with hope, but with the particular ache of something that continued existing in you without your consent, and you did not immediately convert that grief into something more manageable. You let it be what it was. You stayed in the room with it. That was not you being unable to move forward. That was you refusing to pretend that something real was not real. That was not you being unworthy of receiving. That was them being unready to give. And what those moments cost you, and what they built in you, and what they converted into inside the private laboratory of your own interior, that is the credential, not the feeling itself. What you chose to do with it, what you refused to do with it. The specific moments of not reaching when the reach would have been so easy to justify, the specific moments of not explaining yourself to people who had decided what your story meant before you finished telling it. That was not the universe withholding. That was the universe building. And what was built, quietly, without an audience in the exact weight of all those specific moments, is the thing that opens this door today, not just for you to feel something, for you to receive it clearly, for the first time, but here is what you need to understand about why it couldn't have arrived before now. The universe is not careless with what it opens. It does not time things arbitrarily or from indifference. Saturn, the planetary force that governs what becomes real and permanent versus what stays in the realm of potential. Saturn enforces a principle of readiness that is not negotiable, not adjustable, not available for renegotiation regardless of how sincerely you want something before you are ready to receive it intact. If this had arrived earlier, 6 months ago, a year ago, the last time you were standing at the edge of something that felt like this, you would have arrived at the connection still needing it to answer a question, still carrying the unresolved weight of your own worth into the dynamic, still looking to the connection itself to confirm something about you that had not yet been confirmed from the inside. And a connection entered from that position is not a connection. It is a mirror test. Every moment inside it becomes about the question, am I enough? Do I matter? Does this confirm what I hope is true about me? And the answer the connection gives, no matter how real the love, is always distorted by the question you brought to it. What would have arrived was not what you needed. What would have arrived was the same circuit, dressed in new language, offering the same partial confirmation that would have felt like resolution and functioned as repetition. The silence was not their answer. It was the universe's answer, a precise, intentional protection dressed in the clothes of deprivation. Saturn does not open doors until both the person and the lesson are structurally ready, not just emotionally willing, not just consciously committed, but genuinely ready at the level where the readiness is in the body, in the quiet, in the way you move through an ordinary day. And here is what has changed. You have stopped arriving at the question with a need for the answer to confirm you. The question itself has quieted, not because you gave up, because you resolved it. From the inside, in private, without anyone watching, without anything external to confirm it was happening. And that, specifically and precisely that, is what made the delay complete. Not time, not endurance. The actual, genuine resolution of what the delay was waiting for. Now, on the other side of the silence, something else is also in motion. The person connected to you through whatever bond this is, and you know who this person is even if you have not let yourself say the name clearly. They have a system. They have always had a system. Not for managing their feelings in the dramatic way, not suppression, not the frantic construction of justifications. Something more ordered than that, more private. They built a room inside themselves for what they feel about you, a separate, contained, internally organized room. They visit it on their own terms. They have never let it bleed into the rest of their life in ways that were visible or disruptive or out of their control. The room is very neat. The room has always been very neat. They are good at keeping it that way. Today, the room's door will not stay closed. Not because they decided to open it. Not because they are ready by their own measure to let it become something they have to deal with in the open, but because Pluto does not respect locked doors, and what Pluto in retrograde does, especially when the sun's full illuminating force is aimed directly at it, is find the seams in what has been carefully sealed and apply pressure at precisely those points. And the door they built, however well constructed, was built to hold against ordinary days. Today is not an ordinary day. It arrives in the middle of something mundane, not in a moment of contemplation, not in the space they have carved out for private reflection, in the middle of something entirely unrelated, a task, a conversation, a moment of transition between one ordinary thing and the next. And something about the specific quality of that ordinary moment, the light, the silence, the specific texture of the air, carries a frequency that bypasses their filed system entirely. Not the memory of you. Something more primary than that, the quality of what exists between you, surfacing through the specific channel of the body before the mind can intercept and file it. The body remembers what the mind agreed to manage, and what the body knows is that the agreement to manage it was never an agreement about its truth, only about its timing. They are feeling it right now as a specific kind of disturbance in the quiet, not disruptive, not alarming, but impossible to ignore in the way that a wrong note is impossible to ignore in an otherwise correct piece of music. Something slightly out of alignment with the managed version of their interior, something in the room that is no longer resting quietly where it was placed, and the system they built to keep it contained is still functioning. Technically, the room is still there, but the quality inside it has changed. There is a pressure now that wasn't there before, a pressure that makes the room feel smaller than it did when they last checked. They are not about to call you. They are not standing at the edge of a declaration. Do not expect any of that, but the recognition is active, fully, physically, undeniably active, and recognition at this level does not go back to sleep once it has been woken. It files differently now. It waits in a new position. It has begun, quietly, to change the calculation. The recognition doesn't ask their permission. It arrived, it is real, and it is already changing the calculation, whether or not they have acknowledged it yet. And now you are standing at a fork, not the one that was available to you months ago, not the old fork between holding on and letting go, a new one that only becomes visible after the internal work has genuinely been done. No one is watching this moment. That is exactly what makes it the most important one. There are two ways to move through what this transit opens today. Not two choices you will announce to anyone, not two paths anyone will be able to see from outside. The difference between them is entirely interior and entirely everything. One way is the familiar orientation of managing, the background process that has been running quietly for months or years, the part of you that has been monitoring for signal, preparing for possible outcomes, building small internal contingency plans to ensure that whatever arrives, it doesn't completely blindside you. That part of you is skilled. It has kept you functional through enormous amounts of uncertainty. It learned its skill in a very good school, the school of not being able to trust that what you needed would arrive without you steering it into position. And it is not wrong. It was not wrong to develop. But today, something about the managing, the constant low-level readiness for the next wave, is beginning to cost more than it protects. You can feel it as a specific kind of tension in the quality of your thinking. Not dramatic, a tightening, the kind that makes everything slightly smaller than it actually is. The other way is something that does not announce itself, does not feel like a decision, and does not arrive with confidence or certainty or any of the signals the mind associates with being ready. It arrives as a quality of allowing. Not passivity. There is nothing passive about what this requires. It requires more precision than managing does. It requires the ability to be fully inside what is happening without organizing it into something controllable, to let the bond be what it is. Ancient, specific, impossible to file under any of the ordinary categories, without immediately reaching for the version of it that fits inside a manageable story. To let what is real about this be real in its full weight and strangeness and significance, without converting it into something more comfortable to hold. The difference between these two internal states is not dramatic. It is not the difference between fear and courage. It is more like the difference between gripping something to prevent it from changing shape and opening your hand and letting it settle into its actual form. The grip requires constant energy. The open hand requires trust, and trust is precisely what this transit is asking you to demonstrate, not as a feeling, but as a physical orientation. Not because trust is always warranted, because you have done enough internal work now to know the difference between a situation that requires vigilance and a situation that requires you to stop managing what it is not yours to manage. This connection, this bond, this whatever this is, it does not require your management. It requires your presence. Ask yourself honestly, in the body before the mind forms the answer, are you still gripping? Or have you finally opened your hand? The answer to that question is already in the body. It arrived before the mind formed the words. Trust what was there first. Now go to the deepest layer of this. Because this bond, whatever you have been calling it, however you have been understanding it, is not a modern phenomenon. It is not a product of your personality or your preferences or the specific circumstances that brought two people into proximity at a specific moment in time. It is older than all of that. Soul contracts are not romantic arrangements. They are not agreements about who you will love or how long they will stay or whether the story ends well by any external measure. They are precise agreements about what must be seen, confronted, and genuinely integrated, not merely survived, not merely felt, but actually incorporated into the structure of who you are. And they are enforced not by sentiment, but by something that operates with the dispassion of gravity. Saturn governs these contracts, and Saturn does not accept the performance of completion. It requires the real thing. This specific connection came to teach you about trust, not trust in the other person. That was never the actual lesson, however much it appeared to be. Trust in what arrives through you. Trust in the reality of what you know before the external world confirms it. Trust in the difference between what your body has always recognized and what your mind has been trying to construct a safer story around. The sole contract at the center of this bond is the agreement to learn, really learn, in the body, not just as a concept, that knowing does not require external confirmation to be real, that what is genuine does not need to be mirrored back to you by another person's behavior in order to exist. And here is the grief inside that teaching, because the grief is real and deserves a full reckoning. This means the connection was always going to require something of you that the other person could not give. Not because they were deficient, because giving it was not their part of the contract. Their part was to create the conditions under which you would have to learn to hold your own knowing without borrowing their certainty to make it feel stable. Every time the connection went quiet, every time the distance arrived, every time the confirmation you were looking for didn't come, that was not the contract failing. That was the contract being kept, precisely, with perfect fidelity to what you had agreed to learn. And the grief of recognizing that, really recognizing it, not as a philosophical consolation but as an actual truth about what happened, is enormous. Because it means the story is not the story you needed it to be. It means the other person was not cast in the role you cast them in. It means what you have been waiting for was never actually theirs to deliver. The contract was specific. Not forever, not even reunion, but the permanent, irreversible shift in how you understand what love requires of you. And that shift has happened. It is not a philosophy you are choosing to adopt. It is something you are now built from. The question that once governed your entire interior, can I trust what I know without it being confirmed from outside, has been answered. From the inside, without the other person's participation. And that answer, once arrived at honestly, is not revocable. It simply becomes what is true. What ends here is not the love. What ends is the version of the connection that could only exist while the lesson was still unfinished. The love, if it was real, does not require the dynamic to survive. Your body has been registering this shift longer than your mind has been willing to credit it. Things that used to feel dangerous no longer trigger the same alarm. That is not numbness. You know the difference now, viscerally, between what numbness feels like and what this feels like. Numbness is a muting. This is a recalibration. A thing has been adjusted. The threat response that used to fire at the first sign of silence, the one that sent a cascade of interpretation through your entire system within seconds of an unanswered message, an ambiguous word, a gap in communication, that response is arriving more slowly now. Or not arriving at all. Not because you have stopped caring, because your nervous system has updated its data about what silence actually means. And then there are the other signals. Someone says a name that is adjacent to the name, not the same, just in the same phonetic neighborhood. And where that used to produce a full-body response, now there is something more like recognition without emergency. The awareness arrives. The awareness is noted. The awareness passes through without requiring the entire system to reorganize around it. You are sleeping differently, not necessarily longer, but with less residue in the first minutes of waking. The transition from sleep to consciousness, which used to come loaded with the immediate reinstallation of everything unresolved, now sometimes arrives clean. Not every morning, but some mornings, and that fraction, those specific mornings, is evidence. You notice your own breathing in the middle of ordinary tasks, a breath that goes a full inch deeper than the last month of breathing, not because you told it to, because something released its grip briefly without announcing the release. A thought about the connection arrives, and for a fraction of a second before the thought fully forms, there is nothing bracing behind it. That fraction, that specific tiny window, is new. It did not exist 3 months ago. It is the nervous system learning, slowly and without fanfare, that not everything that resembles the past is the past repeating. Not every quiet is the quiet that preceded pain. Not every unanswered question is a signal that you were wrong about what you felt. This is not the quiet of having given up. This is the quiet of something that is genuinely finished. The body knows the difference, even when the mind is still catching up. And as the nervous system settles into its new baseline, the life around you begins to reorganize around what you actually carry now, not around the old, unresolved version of you, but around what you have become through the carrying. You are not waiting to become someone. The becoming already happened, in private, without announcement, in the exact window where it had to happen to be real. What is here now is not preparation, it is arrival. Decisions that used to require enormous internal negotiation now arrive clean. Not because the external circumstances simplified, they didn't. Because the internal conflict that used to create the complexity dissolved at its root. The part of you that used to argue for both sides simultaneously, the part that could make a convincing case for staying in uncertainty and an equally convincing case for releasing it, that part has stopped arguing. Not because it was defeated, because one direction simply became the only one that still had weight. The other one ran out of reasons. The things that used to feel exciting but faintly draining, the connections that offered stimulation without depth, the conversations that moved quickly along the surface without ever reaching the layer where actual contact happens, now register as hollow before they even fully arrive. You notice their shape before you step inside them. You can feel, almost immediately, whether something has real mass or whether it's moving fast to avoid having to be still. What used to feel like safety, the familiar ambiguity, the connection that never quite committed to being fully real or fully over, now feels like a ceiling, a very low one, and standing under a low ceiling long enough changes how you hold your shoulders. You have stopped holding them that way. The synchronicities have changed their character. Where they used to feel like nudges, the universe trying to redirect your attention towards something you weren't yet seeing, they now feel like confirmations of where you already are. Something in the external world has begun to organize itself around you differently, not because circumstances changed, but because the frequency you carry changed, and frequency is what the field responds to. Other people's emotional weather is easier to read accurately now, not because you became more analytically sophisticated, because you are no longer filtering their signals through the distortion of your own unresolved wounds. What a person actually means, as opposed to what you needed them to mean or feared they meant, arrives more directly. Less translation required, less rereading required, less retroactive reinterpretation required. And here, specifically here, something that was tolerated before becomes unavailable to your nervous system. The pattern of being held at emotional arm's length by someone who knows exactly what they feel, the pattern where someone is in full possession of their own internal truth and chooses repeatedly to not give you access to it. That pattern can no longer find purchase in you, not because you made a decision to reject it, because something in you literally cannot organize itself around it anymore. The cost of adjusting your entire inner life to fit someone else's comfort with ambiguity has become a cost the system refuses to pay. You know the specific quality of this, carrying the full weight of a connection while the other person remains comfortable in its ambiguity. One person showing up with both hands open, the other keeping one hand on the exit. That asymmetry, which used to feel like a dynamic you could work within, now registers instantly, like a note that is slightly flat in an otherwise in-tune piece. The ear catches it before the mind names it, and once caught, it cannot be unheard. The version of you who explained your depth to someone who used your explanation as evidence that you were too much, that version is no longer available, not as a defensive posture, not as a wall, as a simple, quiet fact about what fits inside you now and what doesn't. Someone who uses your honesty against you requires you to stop being honest to remain in the dynamic. And stopping being honest now requires an act of self-betrayal that the body registers as wrong before the mind has finished forming the argument. Waiting for honesty that someone has already decided you don't deserve, the specific experience of waiting for a truth to be offered that has already been withheld as a choice, that waiting used to feel like love. It felt like patience. It felt like the giving of space that genuine care requires. And it was not those things. It was the specific cost of a dynamic that required you to be smaller than your actual dimensions in order to remain sustainable for someone else. You did not close yourself. You clarified. And clarity does not reduce what is possible. It removes what was never going to be real anyway, and makes the remaining space available for what actually is. Now, what happens if this soul, the one connected to you through whatever this bond is, steps back into your field? The question of whether they return is no longer the question that governs your interior, but the answer, when it arrives, will be legible, clearly, immediately, without the distortion of need bending the signal. If they return, what you receive them with is not guardedness, and it is not the flung open arms of someone who has been waiting so long that any arrival feels like rescue. It is something more precise than either of those. It is the full capacity to see clearly, to see what they bring and whether it is the same version of the dynamic in different language or something genuinely different. And you will know, not from analyzing their words, not from cross-referencing their behavior against a checklist of what transformation is supposed to look like, from your body's first response to their actual presence. The body has a faster and more accurate read than anything the mind constructs. What your body will register first, if they return, is whether the weight has shifted in them the way the weight has shifted in you, whether they are carrying themselves differently, whether the room they built for what they feel has expanded into something they can live in openly, or whether they have simply decided after a period of manageable absence to visit the room again and see if the feeling is still there. The feeling will still be there. That part is not the question. The question is what they are willing to build around it now. Develop each scenario to its full depth. If what returns is real, if what comes through the door is a person who has done something genuine with the time and the distance and the weight of the recognition that has been active in them, you will receive it from ground that belongs entirely to you, not with the performance of certainty, not with the strategic calibration of someone who learned not to seem too eager, with actual, physical groundedness, the kind that doesn't shift under the pressure of hope or fear, because hope and fear are no longer the organizing forces of your interior. If they do not return, if the recognition stays active in them but does not convert into action, if the room stays locked from the outside even as its contents press harder against the walls, then the absence confirms something. Not that you were wrong, not that what you felt was not real, that the bond was real, the lesson was real, the contract was real, and the completion of the contract does not require their participation. It was never going to require their participation. The completion happens inside you. It already has. Their return was only ever one of two possible forms of confirmation, the other form being the ability to remain whole without it. And that second form of confirmation is now what you are living. Both doors open onto something real now, not because the outcomes are equal, because you are no longer different people depending on which one walks through. That steadiness is the thing. That is everything. If something in this transmission landed somewhere specific, not just as a thought but as a physical recognition, a shift in the quality of your breath, a settling in the muscles behind your shoulder blades, honor that by doing one thing right now. Like this video, not as a habit, as a signal to yourself that you showed up for something real today. Subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. These transmissions build on each other. What opens in this window connects directly to what becomes available in the next one. And in the comments, write, "My body already knows." Say it out loud as you type it, not for anyone reading it, for your own nervous system. Because words spoken with real intention complete something that silent reading leaves open. And if someone in your life is carrying something they haven't been able to name, something that lives in their hands, behind their eyes, in the quality of their breath in quiet moments, share this with them. Your soul already knows who. Here is the truth you came here to remember. You started this transmission the same person who began this day. The hands that slowed down before you knew why, the weight behind the eyes, the body receiving something before the mind had a name for it. That was not randomness. That was this moment calling you back to something you had almost convinced yourself to file under, things you would never fully understand. You return to your ordinary life now. The same room, the same tasks, the same external circumstances. But the quality of what you are carrying inside them has changed. The buried thing is no longer buried. The light reached it. And what the light reveals cannot return to the dark simply because the day continues. This is not a transmission you will forget by the time the next ordinary thing demands your attention. It lives in the body now, in the hands, in the slow, specific, undeniable quality of what you already knew before you pressed play.